All right, so today's workshop will cover starting your project, project ideas, resources, and examples.
All right, so welcome everyone to the 71st Greater San Diego Science and Engineering Fair. This fair is all about researching a project that's interesting to you, connecting to the scientific community, and having fun. If you guys have any questions or want some peer advice, you can stay afterwards and join some breakout rooms. So in today's agenda, we're first going to find a project idea, and then we're going to take a look at the GSDSEF website and other resources.
So coming up with your project idea, projects can be from anywhere from science, engineering, math, and computer science. However, most projects do end up combining a mix of either science and engineering or computer science and engineering. It's oftentimes a mix. There are 16 project categories, and this is the list of the categories. There's animal science, behavioral and social science, biochemistry, biomedical health, sciences and biomedical engineering, chemistry, computational biology and bioinformatics, computer science and system software, earth and environmental sciences, engineering, electrical, mechanical, and robotics, engineering, energy, materials, and transport, mathematics, microbiology, physics and astronomy, plant sciences, and product testing. Product testing is only for the junior division, so if you're in ninth grade or above, you cannot do product testing. First, to come up with your project, you should decide on what projects you're interested in, and what area. If you're interested in if you're interested in biology, you might want to do something related to that. Another tip for coming up with projects is finding problems that you see that you think you could help fix. What is something that really matters to you is another a great way to come up with a project. You want to find a project that you can relate to, and also you want to make sure you aren't doing a project that's been done before. You don't want to be doing the same project that everyone does. You want to be unique. Science News Magazine is a great way to find resources and articles and inspiration.
Right. So there's a couple of guidelines for choosing a project first, though, and these are kind of general guidelines. Number one is always consider your safety and the generals. How safe is that the idea that you have? Also consider if it's feasible, not just in terms of it being safe, but also do you have the resources? Do you have the location? Do you have the budget in order to do it? And it's also important to kind of stray away from anything like gender comparisons and also consider if you can have a significant sample size, if that's kind of the general direction of where your project is going. If you think your project's going to include like a big sample size, or just making sure that your sample size is appropriate.
So now I'm sort of going to go over some of the resources we have if you want to find a project idea. So I'll go through these live. So let me actually exit the slideshow here. And so let's go to the GSCSEF website. And here we can go to Students, Resources, and Section A. So Student Resources. Section A is here. And this is sort of deciding on what type of project you want to do. And there are guidelines for each type of project, what makes a good STEM project, comparing the scientific method and engineering method. This is really helping you get started. Then we can also go to section B, and here we have somewhere you can find getting project ideas. One place I want to draw your attention to is general science or engineering. Science buddies can help. So what you can do here, it's sort of a 30 questions kind of thing. Find me a project. You'll be a student taking it for yourself more than a month, let's say grade 7. You can pick the area for your project and you can answer the remainder of the questions. I'm not gonna actually go through and answer all of these because I don't think we have that much time. But you can go through this website to find a proper project. And once you answer all the questions, it'll give you a bunch of problems that it thinks you might be interested in. So if we click on the first one, wild winds detecting turbulence around structures. So this is a project you found online. Remember, that means you can't directly copy it. This is a starting point. If you're interested in something like this project, you can think of a way to modify this project, which we'll talk about in just a couple slides. And you can figure out how you can make it your own project for the fair. Another resource we have is ZFairs. So I'm going to open that actually. And ZFairs is a great resource because it has under Fair Showcase, which is where I am right now, it has every single project you may be interested in. And these are all projects from last year. So for instance, if I was interested in junior projects in biochemistry, all of these projects are from last year and they were done in the biochemistry topic. So you can get some ideas from this. You can see how you can modify these projects a little bit to get a new project to bring to the fair. So let me go back into the slideshow. So now I want to talk more about updating previous projects since we saw where to find those. So you can change any aspect of the project. For instance, you may want to change the variable. You may want to do further prototyping or extend the initial idea. However, you need to make a clear difference between project.
Let's not put.
Sorry, you want to make sure you have a clear difference between project and demonstration of principle. You shouldn't already know the answer to the hypothesis beforehand. Everyone already knows the melting point of ice or something like that, right? So you shouldn't be able to answer that question pretty easily. It's not a project otherwise, you're just proving something that is already known to be true. So with that in mind, these are also examples that we have created. So this is a real project from last year in animal sciences. Does the food you feed harvester ants affect their productivity? So your abstract is going to be much longer than this, but I simplified it to the more important parts for this workshop. For this project, I tested if ants are more productive with certain foods. I hypothesized that ants would be most productive when they were fed honey. And this is the last sentence, so I skipped a bunch of the middle parts. Obviously, when you write your abstract, you'll want to include those. So to conclude, the harvester ants fed honey were most productive, which supported my hypothesis. Now we want to change this project. What's something that you could change? We can maybe instead of looking at productivity, let's look at lifespan. So we want to test if ants have a longer lifespan, and the hypothesis may be that the food that you give the ants, in this case honey, would increase the lifespan compared to other foods. And then if your hypothesis was correct, you'd write to conclude the harvester ants fed honey lived the longest, which supported the hypothesis. So we have some more examples. Let's go through those.
So this project was focused on how electromagnetic fields can affect flatworms, also known as planaria. Besides looking at the abstract, we can also look at the results and the conclusion to get an idea of what was studied and how. So here we can see in the conclusion that there was 3 different groups of EMF, and it was found that the highest EMF group had the greatest difference on the regeneration of the planaria. And how they studied the regeneration of the planaria was looking at the fully regenerated heads. So if we wanted to adapt this project, instead of looking at electromagnetic fields, we could look at pH or some other environmental variable. And instead of maybe studying the results through the fully regenerated heads, we can maybe look at how long it takes to fully regenerate a head, or a certain number of planaria are able to survive through the pH. And then instead of having 3 groups of high EMF, low EMF, and no EMF, we can maybe adjust it to have 5 groups of different varying pHs, like 20%, 40%, 0%.
Right, so this is another one of those examples, and this one we're taking a look at the effects of delayed gratification on academic performance. And before we go in, let's take a look at kind of what they studied. So it seems like if we look at the graphs over here on this side, they use STAR exam results to measure the academic performance. And their abstract was that delayed gratification is an important motivator for daily activity. And they suggested that the researcher measured performance on the STAR exam using candy as the motivator. And they concluded that someone with a higher academic performance can stay longer without delayed gratification. So now that we've kind of looked at what they studied and some of their variables, we can consider how we can change it. So if we move on to the next slide, we can change it was previously delayed gratification. We can change that to encouragement. And considering that we looked at STAR exam performance, we could consider moving outside of the educational sphere and looking at athletic performance. So we could, for the encouragement, we could measure maybe using words of encouragement. So maybe a sample abstract for this experiment might be words of encouragement are an important motivator for performance. And I tested the effect of praise on athletic performance in a particular sport. So maybe you could measure athletic performance from like a statistical standpoint. You can measure maybe how many games they won in a certain season, or you could kind of also something that you should also know with like general science fair projects is that sometimes you can alter like the almost like the bandwidth of what you're measuring. So you could measure from a very general like a larger standpoint, how many games they won in a season. Maybe you want to look at individual games. You want to see how many points they scored in a specific game. So you have a lot of freedom with that, but this is kind of just an example of what you might change.
So here's another project. It's called JR 590 freezing point of ice cream. So in this project, the student added different compounds or measurements of salt and sugar to the ice bath, and they wanted to see how this would change the ice cream, like how would it change how it froze. But say we wanted to replicate this project, what are some variables we could change? Well, we could use different ice cream flavors because different ice cream flavors might freeze differently to different amounts of salt or sugar. And depending on the cones and cups you freeze them in or serve them in, it can also affect the freezing points. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll see that these are some more variables we could also change, which are like storage temperatures, right? How you store your ice cream, how cold is the environment that you store your ice cream in, and then the room temperature that you serve the ice cream in, and anything else you add like chocolate syrup or sprinkles. So here's our changed project. It's called Freezing Point of Ice Cream in Different Environments. So you can see that the difference in both abstracts is that the new project focuses more on the flavor and storage conditions rather than salt and sugar. So in our overview, we test the storage conditions of ice cream and serving methods to see how this affects our freezing points. So this is something called the demonstration of principle, right? Because if you don't make an interesting project or something that's not trivial, the judges will not be very interested when you present your project. So like, for example, this ice cream project, it was interesting because it was something the student was curious about. But say you tried to make a project called freezing point of ice, you could get that from a Google search. So almost no one would be interested in your project. So please try to make interesting projects.
And I just want to mention that not only will the judges not be interested, but the SRC, which is the Safety Review Committee, will not be accepting the project into the fair. So make sure you consider whether or not your project is a demonstration of principle or an actual project.
All right, so let's move on to part 2 of our workshop, and it's going to be all about planning your project. Okay, so there's kind of a general workflow that you might want to follow. Of course, not every experiment is the same, but this is kind of a general workflow. So we're going to start off with brainstorming ideas, giving a little background research, and also designing our experiment. So we want to design how we want things to run things. And also one super important thing is that we need to figure out logistics. So make sure to take into kind of what might go wrong, and most of the time, to be quite blunt with you, things will kind of go wrong. So figuring out logistics to minimize that inevitability is something important that you should consider. And then next, we're going to apply to the scientific review committee that Arnav mentioned, the SRC. There is a safety review form that you need to fill out. But just make sure if this applies to your project on the GSDF website, it will say if you're doing this kind of project, you do need to fill out these kind of forms. So making sure you know what forms to fill out, and also receiving approval before you start your experiments. Okay, so then next you're going to generate data through your experiments. You'll be performing all tests that you have included in your experiment design. And then you'll be performing data analysis. So you'll look at your data and you'll see what you can make of it. The next step after that is the project quality screening. So this is another one of the screenings. You're going to report your write-ups, and you're going to also work on your board design now that your experiment is done, and make sure to practice speaking and presenting your experiment. And you'll be doing this until the science fair, which is in March. And there are also post-science fair options where you should remember that the science fair is not all there is to experiments that you might have made. There are future opportunities that kind of go outside of the science fair, but you will learn more about these when it comes to the science fair kind of ending. So another important thing is that every high school project needs to go the SRC before starting the project. So for middle school projects, they only need to go through the SRC if they need to use an ISEF form. So just make sure to keep this in mind.
So about those forms, there are some very important deadlines that you have to meet in order to be accepted into the fair. So with the SRC deadline, it is around September, October latest. You want to get these in as soon as possible though, because you do have to complete them to start your project. So if you complete your form sooner, you can start your project sooner, and then you'll have a more fleshed out project for that quality screening in January and like February. And it's important to check our schedule on the Greater San Diego Science Fair website. Under that schedule, you'll be able to see the quality screening deadlines. Once you get those forms in, those are going to be different per grade, but the SRC approval is what you should be focusing on right now and filling out those forms. One more thing is that it's important to, even if you think you can like get your forms in maybe like a week ahead of time, you have to consider if it's like a winter break. For these forms, you're going to need teacher signatures. So make sure your teachers aren't away on vacation and you can't reach them. So on that note, do not procrastinate with your project or with your forms. It can be a hassle and really, really stressful if you're trying to get those forms in last minute or if you're just wrapping up your project. So try and get everything done as soon as possible. It'll alleviate your stress, it'll help us out, and you'll have a higher quality project.
So the next workshop we have is workshop 3, which is for SRC screening. So make sure to stay tuned with that. That'll help you out with the forms. Thank you so much. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us to the GSDSCF email. On our website, we have a place where you can contact us, and we have Instagram and Facebook. So with that being done, let me end the recording.